Immunisation rates in some of our wealthiest inner city suburbs are not improving and in fact falling markedly despite the introduction of no jab, no play laws. Dr Margie Danchin is a paediatrician and senior researcher at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, and I'm pleased to say she joins me now in the studio. Margie, thanks so much for coming in.
You're welcome.
The suburbs we're talking about are Burwood East, South Yarra, St Kilda and Brighton, where I think only 85% of children are vaccinated. That is well below the national average. What is happening in these suburbs?
Well, Alicia, you'll be aware that the Australian Institute on Health and Welfare immunisation rate data was released last week. And in fact, the national average for immunisation rates is around 93%. So immunisation rates are not actually falling. In fact, in the last 12 months, there's been a 0.7% point increase. So they're not actually falling, but there's a large variation across local areas, which is reflected in these data.
OK, let's talk about Burwood East, for example. Only 5 years ago, I think the immunisation rate there was around 94%. That's now fallen to be in the 80s, I think 85.3%. What is going on in Burwood East and those other suburbs that I mentioned before?
Yeah, we found this in some research that we've also been doing in the southeastern suburbs, some of the wealthier suburbs that have been highlighted in the report, such as Brighton, St Kilda, Prahran. And we've found that parents in these areas with higher levels of education actually have more concerns about the safety and the necessity of vaccines than parents with lower levels of education. So what we're seeing, I think, is this cognitive dissonance between parents who are highly educated and many of whom actually have a background in science, who are questioning the safety of vaccines. So
it's a deliberate decision rather than forgetting, for example?
That's right. I don't think it's really complacency. It's much more complicated than that. Many of these families are, as I said, highly educated, very well read, and they have genuine questions about the safety of vaccines in particular, and they're really seeking answers to those questions.
We've seen no jab, no play laws introduced. We would have thought that that might have lifted immunisation rates in all areas, but it hasn't worked in these spots.
We have seen, as I said, an overall increase of about 0.5 to 1 percentage points across most of the immunisation time points, the 1, 2 and 5-year-old time points. But as you say, introduction of no jab, no pay, which was introduced nationally in January 2016, no jab, no play, which is linked to childcare entry and kindergarten, is actually only in Victoria.
Okay.
So I think these policies have had an impact on immunisation rates, but I think it's predominantly acting as a reminder for many families. From our research, we're finding that these policies have only affected the decision-making of about 20% of refusers, or those parents who are highly hesitant to vaccination.
OK, that's interesting. In March, a Royal Children's poll that you were heavily involved in revealed that 1 in 11 Australian parents still believe there's a link between autism and immunisation. How concerning is that for you?
It is concerning, and we've found that in other populations that we've surveyed, so mums attending maternal and child healthcare centres, pregnant women. It's a consistent finding that about 10% of parents are still concerned about a possible association between the MMR vaccine and autism. And I really think that speaks to the fact that we as providers need to spend a lot more time reassuring parents and addressing their concerns. And I think that's the other point I'd really like to make, is in improving immunisation rates and in helping these families make a decision to immunise, education or information is not enough. We really need effective communication strategies, which is through GPs and paediatricians.
I was going to ask you that because we hear that education is the key, but some of these suburbs that have low rates, as you talked about, have parents that are highly educated and are still making this decision.
That's right. And I think we need to be careful about that. We can't just assume that by throwing more information at parents and giving them more fact sheets is going to help them to make a decision and, in fact, alleviate their concerns, because consistently it's about vaccine safety. So we would really encourage parents, if they have concerns, go and speak to your healthcare provider, talk to your GP, pinpoint those top 3 concerns, and then really speak to someone who you trust. And I think that's the way we help, really effective vaccine decision making.
Yeah, it's a really great message. All right, Margie, we really appreciate you coming into the studio this afternoon.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.